Hello, class. Brother Rodella here, hoping that this lesson finds you well and safe. We'll be looking at Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. And then we'll also be looking at different versions. And we'll be learning some Spanish. And hopefully that will make the study fun for you all and also look at it in that Spanish version and how it can paint a different picture regarding the gates of Hades. And you see my background. I'm using a soccer game, or as we like to call it, football, as my background, and hopefully use sports as an analogy on the discussion that we'll be having or the lesson that we'll be having, and hopefully towards the end it makes some sense. The gates of Hades. If I was to ask you what wins championships, would you say defense or offense? And think about it for a little bit. And as you think about that, we'll come back to that question towards the end. But there's always some debate, or always has been some debate on whether defense wins championships or offense wins championships, especially in football, American football. Before we get started, as I've always done, is to introduce a Spanish word of the day. And today's Spanish word is roca. Roca. And I'll be using it in a sentence, and I'll be reading that quote below. Desde que el hombre se agachó y agarró una roca, se armó. Now, this brings us to our assignments. I would like for you to translate the sentence, and I'll read it again. Desde que el hombre se agachó y agarró una roca, se armó. And if I could also get the definition for roca. And this is an interesting quote. Once you translate it, you'll see why it's interesting, and it caught my attention when I first heard this quote. So let us go to the book of Matthew, chapter 16, verse 18. And I'll be reading from the North American Standard Version first, and then we'll look at four other translations. Verse 18. I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. All right, and we want to look at the gates of Hades will not overpower it first. The gates of Hades will not overpower it. Now let us go and look at two other English translations. The NIV says, and I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. So the NIV states that the gates of Hades will not overcome it. Still talking about Hades, and we're still talking about the how the church is at the gates of Hades. The King James Version reads, and I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So the King James Version states that the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, when we look at Hades, we refer to Hades, or we look at Hades as the god or lord of the underworld in Greek mythology. And he has authority in that realm. Now, because he has authority in the realm of the dead, he has possession of those dead souls. And a little bit more on that as we get further into the study. Now let us look at some Spanish translations. The first translation reads, Mas yo también te digo que tú eres Pedro. There's a familiar name. Y sobre esta piedra edificaré mi iglesia. And there's a familiar word, iglesia, that we've all gone over and looked at in the English version. Y las puertas del infierno no prevalecerán contra ella. I'll read it again. Mas yo también te digo que tú eres Pedro, y sobre esta piedra edificaré mi iglesia, y las puertas del infierno no prevalecerán contra ella. So in this translation we have las puertas del infierno, the gates of the inferno, will not prevail against her. So this translation uses gates of the inferno, the gates of the inferno. Let's look at another one. Yo te digo que tú eres Pedro, y sobre esta piedra edificaré mi iglesia, y las puertas del reino de la muerte no prevalecerán contra ella. I'll read it again. Yo te digo que tú eres Pedro, y sobre esta piedra edificaré mi iglesia, y las puertas del reino de la muerte no prevalecerán contra ella. In this translation, gates of Hades is translated as the gates of the kingdom of death. Very interesting, huh? Gates of the kingdom of death. So those are two interesting translations. We have gates of the inferno and gates of the kingdom of death. And because of the influence of the Greek Empire, now remember that the Greeks had conquered a lot of Europe, North Africa, and they were expanding towards the east. And so many people were aware of the Greek gods, and some of these cultures, some of these nations adopted the worship of some of these gods, and they called them by different names. But nonetheless, it was influenced by the same gods that the Greeks worshipped, including the Romans. So everyone was aware of Hades. Everyone was aware of Zeus. And they gave a lot of reverence towards these gods. And even the Jews knew of Hades, and Matthew, using gates of Hades, people were able to relate to that and what he was speaking of. So the influence of a nation or of a culture was important to the expansion of that empire. And we see that with some of the gods that other cultures adopted. And then if we look at sport teams, back in the 90s when I was growing up, the Cowboys were winning Super Bowls. And some teams wanted to model that same type of style. And so we can say that some of these teams were influenced by the Cowboys, and some of them had that same type of strategy to win games. We look at the New England Patriots and how they operate, and how other teams have modeled the same style to that of the New England Patriots. And we see that in many other sports, in basketball, soccer, in boxing. I love watching boxing. Some of the styles that some of the older boxers used are being used today because they've had a great deal of influence on some of these newer boxers who try to mimic the same styles. And it's sometimes difficult to do because, you know, um, you have to develop that same style as well. So there's training and preparation. And in boxing, you have to, well, in many sports, you have to view many recordings of the way that some of these boxers box. And sports has been around since almost the beginning of time. We looked at the Egyptians, we looked at some of the hieroglyphs, and they used archery as a sport, and they also used archery as an offensive attack. And so they practiced and prepared, and they had competitions to see who was the better archer. They also had wrestling, and they would compete in wrestling matches to see who was the top dude, right? The natives of Central and South America, the Aztecs, they participated in sports, in activities, and they held competitions as well. You see here that this individual is trying to hit that rubber ball, which that's what the game is called. It's called the rubber ball game, and the objective is to hit the ball with either your foot or your hip and get it into the round donut hole shaped object that's hanging against the wall. A very difficult game to play. It looks like, but I'm sure that some of these guys worked hard to hone their skills. And it is said that the winner of the competition was going to be offered up as a sacrifice. And they look forward to that, some of these players. And there's two sports in modern times that could possibly have been influenced by this game here. Basketball would be one of them, where the player is trying to get the ball into the hoop, into the net. And here they're battling to get a trophy, to get that championship, offense or defense. And then in gymnastics, we have the athlete competing for that gold medal. In gymnastics, you can do your dance, you can do your routine, and it looks nice. But at some point, you have to do your skill, right? Your somersault, which will gain you the points that you're going to need, and you have to land it almost perfect. So at some point, you have to push forward. At some point, you have to go on the attack. So in sports, we have looked at some of the battles that our athletes face. But in the spiritual war, in the spiritual world, we are also faced with some battles. And war is present throughout the Bible in both the Old and New Testament. Sometimes God will stir up a nation to carry out his punishment. Jeremiah 46, Isaiah 19, and chapter 19, verse 2. Sometimes God would deliver a people from conquered nations or from the power of darkness. Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 through 2, Colossians chapter 1, verse 13. God also prepares his people for battle. Psalms 144, verse 1. He equips and encourages us while we head into battle. Joshua 1, verses 9 through 11. And we can be proactive while we shelter. We can call our brothers and sisters, call some of our peers, and help with any provisions that they may need. War is daunting, and if you could use one word to describe war, what would it be? Think about that, right? Most people, when they hear war, they think of conflict, bloodshed, strife, combat, strike. To most people, all these words to describe war and battles sound scary or inhumane. They carry death all over them. The truth of the matter is that war is a reality, again, in both the physical and spiritual world. However, the great and good news is that the Bible reveals who we should rely on. And when we rely on God, we see that He prepares us. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11. Again, Joel chapter 3, verse 19. And He arms us. Jeremiah 51:20. He protects us and He saves us. In class, I just want to remind y'all that God has delivered that knockout blow. He has defeated the devil. And it's amazing how He did it. When we look at the Bible and we see that, He delivered this devastating counter, a counter that the devil did not see coming. Just when Satan was thinking that he had God cornered, pummeling him by delivering Christ to be sacrificed, to be killed, what he didn't anticipate was Christ being buried and yet resurrected. And that was that knockout blow. And so we've won the war, but we have to continue to battle. And so our influence should be Christ and to carry His message into all the world. So I hope that this lesson was beneficial to you all. I hope that we can soon meet again. And so we will be prayerful for that. And we will be prayerful for each one of our healths. And I'm going to be praying for you all to be successful in your continued studies at home and your studies with education. So next lesson, I will present another Spanish word, but I would like to encourage you all to continue to read the book of Matthew in chapter 16, and we'll also be discussing and studying on what it Jesus mean in regard to the first part of verse 18. We read the second part, the gates of Hades will not overpower it. But what about that first part? I also say to you that you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Until next time, I love you, and see y'all next time.